Be here this morning. Oh no, we're live now. It says broadcast live. So I'm going to start again. Good morning, good morning, good morning to everybody that is listening and watching live. Everybody that's going to catch the replay later on. And what a beautiful morning it is to be sharing, be on this podcast with the incredible Richard Turrell. He is an addiction and behavioural therapist. He's going to guide us through, and we're going to have a conversation about his journey, where he was to how he got to where he was today, his experiences. And I'm not very knowledgeable at this stuff because I ain't no therapist. So you're going to be guiding me, and I'm just going to interject with some questions as and when they arise. I don't believe there's anything, there's such a thing as a stupid question, only if you don't ask it. So be mindful that I might be a bit dumb. So
yeah, no problem. Don't worry.
So Richard, over to you. Like, take us on a trip, take us on a journey.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for asking me to do this. And yeah, if I get like, I guess the other side of that is if I get overly technical, then feel free to interject and say like what you're talking about.
I will.
So yeah. Thanks for asking me to do this. And I mean, I guess like really the journey starts like in childhood, as it often does, and I was listening to a speaker that, from outside of like kind of like the mainstream recovery community, but someone who's like in the public eye, and he's in like sobriety, and he does various things. He's been on the TV and stuff like that. And I was listening to a podcast he does, and he said, he put it really nicely. He said, people don't end up, like hammering, drugs in a really destructive way or using really destructive drugs, like unless there's some kind of vulnerability there, unless there's like some kind of emotional vulnerability, or that, they're, in some way there's something missing in their life that makes them vulnerable, and then like drugs come in and kind of like fill that hole, or drugs, by which I mean alcohol, or it can be like addictive behaviors as well, although usually like they all they kind of all link up somewhere along the way. But so for me it was like growing up in what looked like from the outside like a really nice background, so very middle class, 2 cars on the drive, not like big house out in Essex. I used to really struggle to talk about this. I went to a private school for my primary school, and then I went to a grammar school, past my 11 plus, bright boy, all of that, and my parents were both, very kind of high achieving professional people. Like, so it kind of like looked great, really. Like, kind of had everything really, like, especially, compared to some of like my, like some of my peers in, that I've kind of, recovered alongside, But then the other side of that is that, my mum had a long-standing battle with alcoholism, which she never really won. My father was could be kind and loving, but was very angry and was often not there. And it turned out had a kind of a whole other life, which we have discovered about since his death. I don't want to go into that too much because it's still pretty fresh still. But like, so I grew up in this, basically in this soup of like unfelt feelings, like unspoken stuff. No one ever spoke about anything. It wasn't an environment that kind of like welcomed like vulnerability or need or or struggle, and it was that really impacted on me. So by the time I get to like kind of double figures, like 10, 11, it's like super anxious. Like when I look back now, like clearly had like some blossoming mental health issues. Felt very different to everyone around me, and objectively, like, was a bit different. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was a bit kind of sheltered. I spoke a bit differently to, like, especially when I got to big school. I spoke quite differently to a lot of my peers, and like I didn't really, I didn't really fit in, And then kind of like there was some bullying. It's quite a lot of bullying. And, I guess I don't always think it's helpful to like compare one's own experience to like everyone. There's always someone that's worse off, right? But like I guess what I would say is like, I think there's a reality to like these days, if you get bullied, like you're in trouble, because like with social media and smartphones, like that stuff will follow you like 24/7, you know. So, but it was a lot of like name calling, being called out, being pushed about, being shoved about, you know, like some hitting and, you know, all that sort of stuff, you know. Yeah, and then at the same time, I was in an environment where like drugs, you know, were around, you know, like kids, you know, kind of like 12 years onwards, you know, so, you know, in the group I was in, like, you know, start sort of experimenting with that kind of stuff, you know, so like hash and, you know, getting drunk and, you know, a bit of acid and stuff like that. And I guess I sort of like look back now, like if I look at like a kind of 12 or 13-year-old now, like they're like, you know, like, I mean, it's a not really obvious statement, right, Liz, but like they're children, you know, like like they are like little children.
We didn't view ourselves as children then, though, because I have a similar story, and it wasn't even in my view of how old I was and doing it. But you're right. When I look at young ladies my age, when I started doing things, I think, oh my God, I want to cradle them.
Yeah, yeah. Like what's going on there? And yeah, so and I was really, it wasn't like a peer pressure thing, you know, like it was kind of like the opposite really, because I was like one of the kind of odd kids, right? So like in order to get in with the cool kids and therefore gain access to like drugs, like I had to go through quite a lot, you know what I mean? Like it was kind of like putting myself in the firing line for like more bullying and getting ripped off here and there, and you know, like, you know, all that sort of part. I was fascinated. The idea of changing the way I felt, like, fascinated me. You know, I was really into that. You know, and you know, I had it modelled for me by my mum. You know, she took a lot of pills, she drank a lot of wine. You know, like a lot of those things. And so to me, it was like quite a natural like thing, like that. You know, that was sort of what I thought you did, was like, you know, you took something to change the way that you felt. And also I disappeared into books at quite a young age. Like that was definitely like an escape for me. Like I'd read and read and read and read and read and read and read. And I started reading sort of like beyond my years. And so I was reading sort of like the novels that I found lying around the house. So like by like writers like Jack Higgins and stuff like that. So in it, the heroes, like they always, you know, they were always drinking. Do you know what I mean? That was where I'd sort of gleaned a lot of my information about like how it was to be in the world, like how you were supposed to be, because there wasn't a whole lot of input coming at home, you know.
And do you think that made a huge difference? You know, that not giving that space to be taught how to look at our feelings and express them. Do you think that made a huge difference?
Yeah, massively. Yeah, massively. Because like I didn't, like, skipping ahead a little bit, but like I didn't get, you know, there's a kind of cliche around like the 12-step recovery community, which some of those cliches are incredibly useful. Some of them are a bit less, you know, so, and some of them are useful for some and not useful for others, right? But the one for me is that I'm kind of referencing. It's like, you know, you get clean and you get your feelings back, and I didn't really. Like I got clean and just kind of set about a number of years of finding like new and inventive ways, and you know what looked like, and in some ways were like in many ways were like less destructive ways to avoid my feelings, right? But like I didn't, you know, like the feelings were like, it was such like an alien thing to me, you know, like I didn't, you know, I really didn't have a clue. Like my sense of identity was so, I would say it was like non-existent actually, you know. And I would remember like people talking about like, you know, like oh, I need to find out who I am. And like I didn't even know that I didn't know who I was. You know, I didn't understand what that meant. You know, I had no idea. Like, what do you mean? You know, like I know what, you know, my name, my date of birth, you know, where I grew up, like what, who am I beyond that? You know, like, so I was like, I didn't even know that I didn't know that I didn't know, sort of thing. It was like kind of just really, really cut off and shut down. And like, and you know, I guess, you know, with the drug stuff and the using, like, cutting a long story short, was like I found, you know, substances and just loved them. You know, like, you know, smoking a bit of hash and, you know, a bit of, you know, kind of ditch weed and stuff like that. And it was like as soon as I knew there was an option to feel some other way other than what I felt, like I wanted to take it. You know, like, and I wanted to choose that option every day. Just given the choice of feeling like kind of anxious and like and really, like, looking back at it now, obviously, of course, this wasn't like the language that I had back then, but like, it's like I didn't know how to exist. You know, like I didn't know how to actually be like in the world. Like I didn't know how to do that. And drugs just made it easier. You know, like they just took the harsh, traumatized to a large degree edge off of that. And so yeah, so like in a very short space of time, I can't really remember it. Like I can, give you exact figures, but like I was, I wanted to take, I was taking something. I was doing everything I could to take something every day to change the way I felt. And when you're a little kid, you've got to be quite creative. So obviously, you're not going to be able to like get hash or get money for hash like every day. But there was booze in the house, obviously, and there were pills in the house, and there was, there was lighter gas in the cupboard, and so it went on from there. Like kind of like taking something every single day to change the way I felt. And then that really, there's lots of kind of events that followed, but like that was my life really for like 20 years, and it, and the drugs changed and the people changed and the circumstances changed, and the drugs got harder and more expensive, and like kind of there were lots of consequences, and I was nearly fatally stabbed in 2007. I got into a lot of trouble with and ran up a lot of debt with people that sold drugs. I sold drugs myself for a long time, and my life really was just a complete cut. Like it was just I just kind of like lurched from like one car crash to another, really. And like because I always had what I knew about life was quite, like I keep saying, it was quite like limited. So I'd always like think that like what I needed to do was what had been modelled to me, which was basically find a way that I could continue to use like substances in a way that would make it possible for me to feel like I could exist in the world without like peeling my own skin off, right? Yeah. And like have a job, get a house, meet a nice girl, settle down, get a car, get all of this sort of external stuff. That was what would make things okay. But of course I could never, and I would at times, there were periods where I'd like take a few steps down the road to like achieving that stuff. I'd always have like, oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, like whatever, like, become a locksmith or like I'm going to go and do this bit of training or I'm going to go and very rarely it ever like came to anything.
Because we wanted to still use drugs whilst trying to obtain all of this.
Yeah. And then there'd be like some kind of binge or some kind of like event or some kind of disaster, which would, it was just like, it just went on and on like that, and it was like, I ended up, because I ran away from the town I grew up in, Southend-on-Sea, and, I ran to Oxford, so I had some sort of family connections there, so I could, get a fresh start and all that sort of stuff, and I tried to get clean, but like being clean was just like, especially then with all of the kind of, very disconnected from any kind of like caring or loving relationships or friendships, because I'd left all that stuff behind, and I was terrified about it catching up with me, so I cut all ties. And lots of regret, lots of shame, lots of guilt, lots of, like the very, very, very loud voice of like self-criticism and all that sort of stuff just plagued me whenever I wasn't using. So I used, like I really, and that's what I did. And but then I kind of became aware of like recovery, people in recovery, and 12-step fellowships, and like community drug services. I never knew about any of that stuff, because the people I used with in Southend, like they weren't talking about that stuff. And like the furthest I got with engaging with the services in Oxford was getting a prescription for like for substitute medication. They never mentioned anything to me. It was all just about like getting off the medication. And like they never met, like they didn't even tell, like I didn't even know that your places like I mean, it wasn't this organisation, but the equivalent of like your Turning Points or CGL, like obviously those organisations are not without their problems, and it's certainly not the answer to everything. But like I didn't even know they existed. I didn't even know there was somewhere I could go and sit like in a room with some other people and like talk about like how I thought I felt, or like I didn't have a clue. But I found out about that stuff kind of under my own steam, and through having reached a point of desperation, and set about getting clean really. And that was in 2010. And I had a few false starts. I spent some time in treatment. I was lucky. It was at a time when you people could get funded to go to treatment, which I understand. I don't work in the public sector anymore, but from what I understand, that is a very difficult thing to do these days. There's not very much money, so the treatment centre, in order to get it, you need to be kind of like, I wouldn't be that profile, single, like, young guy with all of his limbs and stuff like that. Like I would not get funding these days. I'm pretty confident in that. But I got funding from Oxford City Council, and they sent me off to a place called Gloucester House, which was like a 6-month primary and secondary program. And
so for people that don't know, explain primary and secondary, because I know there's lots of people that aren't in the recovery community would be like, well, what is that? So can you
so primary is like you're basically kind of quite locked down, and you're kept busy most of the time because you're like left to your own devices. You'll probably do something terrible to yourself or someone else, and like you've got it's quite a high level of intensity in terms of like going to group, doing some other kind of meaningful activity. Like there's a lot of structure and containment. So that's primary. And then in secondary, they sort of take I wouldn't say they take the stabilizers off, that's not right, but you sort of end up on a bike with at least that might have pedals, rather than one of those ones that you just push along the ground, so you've got a bit more time. You're going out into the community doing a bit of voluntary work, like you're getting the bus into the nearby town centre. That was how, but something along those lines, whatever, you've got a bit more time and space just to see how you get on with that, with managing your own kind of time and, seeing if you can make the odd positive decision, like under your own steam, and like, I don't mean that to sound like derogatory, but like that's how it was for me. It was like, it was really that, like it was that sort of basic. It kind of needed to be really, like I didn't have a clue.
Up this point, it had to be successful anyway. So you needed that extra support in secondaries where they sort of start to try and live,
and see how you get on. Like see how you get on and make, and then what, but there's enough of a structure in place that whatever mistakes that you do make, like you've got a space to, like to catch yourself or to be caught, or help, like on that and kind of figure it out, and so that was all really good, and then I came back to Oxford. Sorry, go on, Liz.
No, I was just going to ask, was that when you first had an experience of talking about that inner stuff, like feelings?
Well, yeah, in very much so, yeah. Like I did, but also back then, like I was still very cut off from all that stuff. So even like I kind of mentioned earlier, like even though I was clean, I didn't really. I guess I was more in touch with myself than I'd ever been, but like I still had an awfully long way to go, and I was still very much on a kind of vibe of knowing the answer, like kind of needing to achieve, like and recovery became something else to achieve at, be that like, working my way through the 12 steps or, doing service or being like the kind of, there were various tasks around that, around the rehab, so like I was the rabbit monitor for a bit, which was quite difficult, because the rabbit would hide and he didn't want to be found. Then he'd try and bite you, but it's a whole other story. But yeah, but like I was determined to be like really, really good at what I was doing, right? And because that was kind of all I knew how to do. That was what was valued, and that was what was prized in my background, in my, in the family system I grew up in. So that knowing what the expected or right thing to say, or the pro-recovery thing to say would have been, and saying that was, like that kind of the way that that was like a further adaptation of the process that I developed growing up, which was, so, it's a way of surviving, but it's a way of surviving the environment, So I did a lot of that at the expense of like what was really going on for me, what was really going on for me was like that, like I didn't, that I was still very, of course, but like, I mean, I guess even I didn't realise the extent of this, was still very, very lost and confused, and still didn't really know how to exist, and was still very cut off from myself, and of course, like it's easy to piece this stuff together, like looking back, but like I would sit in, I remember on Friday morning there was a 10-minute mindfulness class, right? So 10 minutes is not a particularly long time to meditate for. If you've never meditated, it's long enough, right? But like it's 10 minutes of your life, right? 10 minutes of a person's life, right? And I could not, so in that 10 minutes, there's nothing to do. Yeah. There's no one to be, except like who and where you are. And I couldn't stand it, I literally like, within like 2 minutes, I would be like, like, my skin would be crawling. Like I was just so overcome with, like what I now know to be like, shame and just, a real kind of deep discomfort with existing almost. Like I can't really. I know that's quite deep, but that's how I understand that feeling now. And the trauma as well, like the trauma of the way I grew up, which included like obviously traumatic experiences, what would be called like episodic trauma, so episodes of trauma, like, violence and so on. And so, feeling like kind of abandoned or left, or, being left somewhere, whatever it was, right? Various kind of episodes of trauma, but also lots of like developmental trauma. So lots of like where, things that should have happened that didn't in my development, which meant that I've, kind of always felt like I was under threat, or, so that something was going to, like happen, and like, I guess I'd caveat all that by saying, like, when I look back now, like, it's just not like a whole blame game thing. It's not like like my parents were really bad people and like they, like they messed me up, right? But like, it's like they undoubtedly did the best they could, because when I, from what I understand of their backgrounds, which in certainly my dad's case is very little, right? But like I know enough to get the picture that like it wasn't pretty, right? But like I do need to understand the factors of where I came from, which led to me being like who I am today, because like that gaining that understanding is part of, it's not the answer, but it's part of moving towards like healing and changing that stuff and doing something different and not playing out that pattern yet again. So when I got to like, I mean, this is jump about a little bit, but when I got to like 3 years clean or something, eventually, like I went into therapy, and one of the, it must have been 3 years, just over 3 years clean, and one of the things that gradually we worked on was like that. It's like, like my parents did the best they could, but there were quite a lot of areas in which that wasn't good enough, and actually, but both of those things can be true. One doesn't have to cancel out the other, because like addicted people and recovering people, they're often quite split. It's black or white. My parents did the best they could, therefore they're good people. Or or the other position, like the kind of more victim-y position. My parents messed everything up and it's all their fault, and therefore I can't change. And it's like, well, actually, all of those things, both sides of that can have elements of truth to it. And learning to be able to hold both is like the key to kind of effecting some real healing and growth and change. So like, I was just basically riddled with like all of this stuff, and just, but I didn't know it, and anyway, I left that treatment center. I did 6 months there. I came out, I used, right, because I was like of all of this, and used for about a month, and then I got the opportunity to come to Birmingham, which of course is where I met you, Liz, right? But when you pitched up, right? But and like to go into some supported accommodation, like so, like basically a house. I lived in with 3 other lads. We were asked to do 3 12-step meetings a week and attend 2 groups a week, and get involved with some kind of meaningful activity, and that was it.
You can shout out the organisation. I don't think it'd be harmful to like.
Yeah. So like Changes UK, you know, which at the time was like the only like gaming town in Birmingham. Now that's like everywhere, from what I understand, you know. But yeah, like it was great. Like, and you know, Steve Dixon, you know, like he was on the end of the phone. I called up and I was like, and I'd met him at some point, you know, in the 2.5 years before this of treatment and community detoxes and all that stuff that I haven't gone into, but you know, getting clean for little spits and spots of time. I've met Steve. I called him. I said, look, I'm really in trouble. Like, I really need to do something different. I'm ready to, you know, like fucking whatever. I'll do whatever it takes. And he got me up there, and you know, and I've been clean since then. You know, and you know that, and next month in a month and 8 days, that was 10 years ago. You know, so I'll be 10 years clean.
Well
right. And I stayed in the Midlands, and I did loads of meetings, and I started doing some voluntary work and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, and then it was obviously I still had all of that other stuff going on, but something about the ingredient that I think meant that I could survive it was, having a change of scene was really important to me. You know, like definitely. You know, because when I got back to Oxford, even though I lived there for 5 years, I used there for 5 years. I wasn't, prolific offender, anything like that. You know, my using is pretty low key compared to some of the people I've recovered alongside, right? But like even in that 5 years, there was enough, like memories, people, reminders, triggers, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, like that. Like it was just kind of everywhere, and like I was like, it just all kind of hit me like a ton of bricks when I came back, and yeah, so I needed to change the scene. That was really important. But also I got into there was a really thriving recovery community, and I was around people with a shared goal, all day, every day, and that was just that just made such a difference to me, and I went through some tough times, but also some really good times. There's some real kind of joyful stuff, and some great experiences and all that sort of thing. And yeah, it was good. So I've been clean since then. And then professionally, I've
What turned you on? What was it, that moment that you thought, this is what I want to now do? What was there a moment? Was there something that turned you on to wanting, I think turned on is the wrong word, but to then actually helping other people the way that you do today?
Well, I mean, not really. I didn't know, part of, I guess, sort of that feeling of, I don't know how to say it. Part of the sort of feeling pretty directionless and uninspired and kind of uninformed about how to live life and stuff like that was, I never had any I never knew what I wanted to do. I never had a clue. I think when in part I was probably too busy just surviving, and but then I got clean, and then I started doing some voluntary work in a detox, and I discovered I had a bit of an aptitude for that, for sort of being with people and being a kind of helper in that kind of environment, supporting people and stuff. And I went off to university and did an addiction counselling degree. And if I'm honest, Liz, at that point it was just I didn't really know what else to do, And a friend of mine had gone through that process ahead of me. He was in it, and I applied for it, and then it kind of came round, and I thought, this will give me. And again, it's this thing about doing. This will give me something to do for the next 3 years, and then I can see where it goes from there, right? And so it wasn't a kind of road to Damascus moment. I'm gonna this is what I'm going to do with my life. It was just like, well, like, it looks like this is the direction my life's going in at the moment. I haven't got anything else. It's not like I had like a trade to fall back on, or anything like like anything like that. Like very little.
Lived experience as well, though. Lived experience, because you've lived this stuff before.
Yeah. I hear that, right? Like, definitely. But I guess the thing with like that lived experience, it has to be, being a professional, doing the work with people, like that can be a curse and a blessing, because there's nothing more dangerous than like an addiction counsellor that can't see past his own experience and allow other people to have theirs. Like, that it can go both ways, because you've got to really, that's why it's really important if people to get into kind of therapeutic, like whatever endeavors, like careers, like they do the work themselves, like they do a good chunk, not like 10 sessions, like at least a couple of years of like personal therapy, and have worked through the 12 steps if that's their thing, but like really had a good look at themselves, like, so that you're not just playing out. Like when I first got into a treatment centre environment, like every like kind of like late middle-aged onwards alcoholic lady became my mum, and then when they wouldn't change, which often people in treatment don't, like I'd get really angry, like because like stuff like that, like get really angry. And some of these would be, they'd be more kind of like early, like personal clients, people that I was like working with on a one-to-one basis, so there I'm there, like, and I'm not actually counselling them, I'm trying to counsel like, like my mother, so that was like, it can be, I get, I think, so lived experience is helpful, but it's like, it's also got to be
like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's got to be work. You've got to work through that stuff. You've really got to, and also there's a thing about like being, like there's a lot of compulsive helping that goes on around the recovery community. Like that person that sponsors like 15 people, or is always there for the newcomer, or like he's the workaholic therapist and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of that, and it's unfortunate. I'm not saying it's like. I'm not going to say like it's like dangerous or it's wrong or it's bad. I don't believe that. Like people do what they do. I've done a lot of that stuff. Like I'm not going to sit here on like some kind of like ivory tower of like, having reached some new level of like self-actualization and looking back on that and being like, oh God, no, that's all just really unhealthy and dreadful. Like that's not my jam. And I think it's look. I think it's a really, it's that kind of thing is a trait that I find really unattractive in others, but it's sad, I've been that person, and it's quite a sad place to end up because you just lose yourself just in a different way, like, and of course it's better than, like, banging up heroin into like your eyeball, like of course it is, but like, it's still like, it's sad, and there's more to life than that,
100%.
Like there's that kind of thing about like balance and stuff, because I guess, I mean, I know, it's sort of like goes back and forth, doesn't it? But like, I guess that's the organic nature of conversation. But like, what I got into this line of work and thought like, I wanted to work in a treatment centre, and I worked out that treatment centres are actually quite difficult environments to exist in. They certainly are for me, they,
you did
like
work in the treatment centre, didn't you? You have worked in a treatment centre. I was looking at your website.
Yeah. So I've worked in treatment centres and stuff like that, and I've done group work in the Nightingale, which is a private psychiatric hospital in Marylebone, West London. I've done that like fairly recently, but it's that being in that kind of environment 4 or even 5 days a week is like, that's not for me. That's not for me. So so I did the addiction counselling degree at Bath, worked in treatment for a bit, but then because of some of the reasons that I've kind of mentioned there, like I decided actually I wanted something different. for my life. So I started studying at the Metanoia Institute, and just getting towards the end, or getting very close to the end of the third year, in doing an integrative psychotherapy master's degree, and really just starting to kind of understand myself, like the human condition, where addiction fits into that, like in a different way, right? And it informs and deepens my practice, and my understanding of me, and just like what it is to, I guess I keep coming back to this at the moment, like to exist, like to be in the world, and how addiction becomes such a force in people's lives, but also how that addiction stems into all sorts of things like helping or doing, or buying or eating, or all that kind of stuff. And I've done some quite big bits of like kind of spiritual work in the last couple of years. I've been away and done there's two brothers, and definitely give them, kind of mention them by name, Luke and Matt Farron. They run these retreats called the Hero's Journey. It was taking me a long time to go into that, what that's involved, but that's been really sort of
transformed. This is really interesting, because I know somebody else could give us a snapshot, because it was new to me, and I've been hearing about this. So try and give us a snapshot about what happens at these retreats, because it's really interesting.
There's a process. It's a dyadic meditation process. So it's a meditation that you do in pairs, and basically there's a structure and a method, a technique. That's the word that's used. A technique which you use to contemplate. The question I've been working on for a couple of years is like, who am I? Yeah, but there's other questions. What am I? What is this? What is life? There's all these. They're a lot of big questions. So it's based on the Zen Buddhist tradition, but then there's a whole sort of story about how it developed into this quite structured technique. And so these intensive courses take place over 3 days. And I guess there are lots of people are going off and doing ayahuasca at the moment, right? So that's like DMT and stuff like that, right? But the idea is that this technique, without the use of any of those psychedelic substances, right, without the use of those substances, which overwhelm the thinking part of the brain, this technique wears it down, and you have the opportunity to experience life in a very different way. And I've been kind of privileged enough to have that experience, and and it's been really transformative for me.
And would you say it combines with what you're doing about existence, how you present into the world? Who am I? What am I bringing with my existence? Would you say it goes
100%. It's contemplating the nature of who you are and how we define ourselves and stuff. Because I get where I'm at the moment is like a year ago, like I really wanted to achieve loads of stuff, and like now I'm there's other stuff that happened. Like my dad became very, very ill and died in quite tragic circumstances a couple of years ago, very out of the blue, 69, just retired. We built a pretty good relationship, which I actually cherished. It was a real kind of bright spot in my life. And he died. There's been a lot of revelations actually about that. A lot of he wasn't practicing a lot of what he was preaching in terms of the what was important in life that was bestowed to me, as a kid. So that's been kind of like a bit of a seismic shift in who I am, but like. Yeah, like it's been massive in just making me think about like what I want my life to look like and who I want to be, and like shedding some more layers, like like this kind of like from like taking drugs was part of an identity for me. Selling drugs was definitely part of an identity for me, and then it was being like this kind of good recovering addict, then it's this guy that sponsors X amount of people, then it's this, this high achieving student, then it's this successful therapist, then it's like, oh, now I'm going to be a successful psychotherapist, and I'm the best in the class, and I'm really experienced and all this stuff, and I really know myself because I've been in psychotherapy for 6.5 years, and I guess gradually over the course of time, like I say, it's taken 10 years, right? But like shedding another layer of that and figuring out like who am I? You know, like yeah.
And I'm going to say in only 10 years. Now, don't get me wrong, 10 years is huge in the recovery sense, but for that personal development to get to where you are today, that's not a long period of time, really. It's like 10 years goes quick. If you know the level of work on where you are today to where you were 10 years ago, it's huge what you've accomplished.
Definitely. But I suppose it's thinking about what I want like the next 10 years to look like, because you know it's been a lot of hard work, and like I'm not sure I'm up for another 10 years of it. I'm kind of like, well, I want to go away next year. I want to go away. I want to buy a camper van and go away for 3 months and travel around Europe. And I want to, like, I want to, I live in London. It's like the greatest city in the world, and like, I live in a very small part. I live between like my office and this home office, and like I'll go to the local parks, or I might even make it down to the river now and again. But like I'm changing all of that. I'm going to go to
world out there, isn't there, to see?
Yeah, I'm going to go to the Tower of London on Sunday. I'm going to go and be a tourist. Well, there you go. You should meet us there. Yeah, but but like stuff like that. So like living, and I do get, it's easy to say that from a position of like I've put the work in, and now I am in a position to do that kind of stuff, to do this. So, and I do get that. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like you can. It's only once you've got the needs on one level met that you can move up to the next. And because of all that hard work, and some, kind of fortunate decisions along the way and stuff like that, like, I'm able to make my way up the pyramid, right? And that's not lost on me. But yeah, like that's what I think is, if we're
so that everybody knows that, because I'm really aware that there's some radio listeners that might not know what the Maslow's hierarchy of needs are. Can you explain?
Yeah, so Abraham Maslow came up with the idea that there's a hierarchy of needs that start with the very basic, like air, and like light, right, and then at the very top of the pyramid is like self-actualization, which is, I guess, another word for like enlightenment or contentment, or.
And there's everything in between, like shelter, food.
There's different things in between, and like so like your basics would be like air, like and water and stuff like that. And I think like shelter and security then I think comes like one up actually, because like you can actually live without that, but you can't live without air basically. No. So air's like at the bottom, and then then the next layer would be shelter and security, and then it gets into layers of stuff about like identity and purpose and so on and so forth, and obviously food's in there, but these things are all arranged in layers. I think he had 5 of them. And the idea is until you can't attend to the needs on one layer until you've got the needs on the layer beneath it met. So obviously if I haven't got any air, I'm not going to be out trying to create a shelter. Like I'm going to be trying to get some air. If you ever see, if you imagine a man like drowning, he's not trying to construct a shelter beneath the sea. He's trying to get some to the air. Do you know what I mean? So like, and so on and so forth. So yeah, but like I guess talking about wellness and all that, and where my journey is now, like I guess that's sort of like where it feels like it lies right now. I guess some of the events, the very sudden and tragic nature of what happened with my father. Also, like if you look at things like if you look at the situation in Ukraine, like those people were like, they were like living their lives, like normal, like quite like a kind of thriving, like culture, like Eastern European, there's, it's like getting on with it, businesses, education, all that sort of stuff, families and stuff.
It's changed.
Everything changes in a heartbeat, and there's other parts of the world where that, one of my neighbours here is a Syrian refugee. Like we don't talk about that so much. Obviously, Ukraine is very visible, but Syria, I don't know, maybe because it seems further away or something like that. But like over there, it's people are like butchers and bakers and candlestick makers, and their country was basically like leveled, and they all end up over here, So it's like life can change in a heartbeat, really. So I'm kind of, a big part of my kind of like wellness journey right now is about like living and like, you know, finding the things in life that really feed me, you know, because like it's
rather than being a human doing, it's being a human being, is
yeah,
it?
exactly. Yeah, but like actually know, yeah, figuring out what that actually means, you know, like
Yeah, because it's
yeah,
very
for me,
individual, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, definitely. But like it's like what, you know, like I do consider, I guess what I would, you know, I really want to emphasize, I'm not that guy that's like, oh yeah, no, like when I look back now, like I wish I hadn't gone off to university and stuff. It's all so meaningless now. I'm on this like spiritual kind of like carpet. I'm glad I did all that stuff. It all got me to where I am today. And like,
Absolutely.
if I hadn't, you know, when I stumbled through the doors of that first 12-step meeting, because like literally, I felt like my options that night were I was either going to go to that meeting or I was going to kill myself, right?
Yeah.
And I got to the meeting, and there were loads of people outside, and I talked about this many times, right? But like, I think it bears repeating. I guess I would, not. That's why I've talked about it many times, right? But like, it's like I got to the doors of that, or near the doors of that meeting, and there were loads of people there, and they were like, you know, all stood around chatting and laughing and joking and having a cup of tea and smoking fags, and they all knew each other, blah blah blah. I thought, I'm not going in there. Like, that looks like I can't do that. Like that, like I was terrified. You know, like I felt so like transparent with like shame and like, you know, that I just wasn't going to fit in like yet again, and that I'd be rejected and, you know, bullied or whatever, you know. Once again, like I was just off, I'm not going it, fuck that, I can't do it, you know. And I walked back down the road, and I got to the end of the road, and I thought, like, God, like, I need to do something. It really needs to be different in my life. And I went back, and I managed to get through the doors of that meeting, and then, you know, and that was in March 2010, you know. So like, yeah, like I've come, you know, come a long way from there. But like, you know, the availability of like recovery in the community and everything that happened after that, like, has just transformed my life. You know, I was, yeah, transformed it.
And then doing all the things like going to uni and working on yourself, and like you said, has got you to where you are today. So I don't think there's anything needs to be regretted. You know, we need people like you.
Yeah, I would say, right, like for anyone that's going to like thinking about doing the same journey, is just take your time. Do you know what I mean? Just take your time. You know, like there's no big rush. You know what I mean? Like there's no big rush. You know, like if you're like, you know, a couple of years into recovery and thinking about going to uni, it's a great idea. You know, it definitely broadens your horizons massively. But you know, maybe go next year. Just take a bit of time. Just take your time. You know, I think that's like it's a like, I guess thinking about that kind of wellness idea. It's just like, you know, we can do all this stuff and be kind to ourselves along the way. You know,
absolutely.
You know, that's really important. You know, because I think a lot of people, when, I mean, I know I did, came in and actually when what a lot of it boils down to early doors is like, I don't feel all right, and I really want to feel all right, and maybe if I do this, like, then I'll feel all right and be enough. And it's like, that's not the case, but it's a good thing to do nonetheless. But just, you know, do it with like the kind of kindness and self compassion and, you know, and love, really. I think that's really important.
Definitely. So if you could give a parting nugget of wisdom to anybody that's just starting out in any arena, whether it be recovery or going to uni or wanting to help people, what would that be?
Just like, in terms of like going to uni and, you know, looking to become a therapist and stuff, like, find, you know, there's a million different types of, well, not quite a million, but probably not far off, like, types of therapy, right? And like approaches and models and stuff. Like, do something that speaks to you. Do something that you think like, yeah, like that. Oh, yeah, I really get that. Yeah. Oh, that's my dog. Sorry.
You see the dog, because I've got to send a picture of this dog, and he, like,
Casper.
hello,
What are you doing? What are you doing, Casper? What are you doing? He makes little like gremlin noises. He's like, yeah, just find some aspect of it that really speaks to you and you're really passionate about. You know, it can be a long haul, you know, and it's like, you know, like that. You need something that you really believe in, you know, and really speaks to you, you know. And if something doesn't speak to you, then it, you know, maybe it isn't for you, you know. Like, like if you're in recovery, if you're early in recovery and you're just getting started in that gear or even thinking about it, just like just take it easy, just like a day at a time, like it's for me it's like it's been a long process, just like if you haven't used today, like you're doing all right, and it's important to do things that will support that, but like just like take it steady, because it's there's a lot to take in. I think a friend of mine put it like that. We were talking about it, and he's a bit more succinct than me. And I was like, yeah, you get clean, and you've got to deal with this and that, face this and do that, and you've got all this going on. And he just went, yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it? And I thought that just really summed it up. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot to take in. Yeah. And like, I think look, we've all got obligations in life, right? But like, whether you're clean and you want to train to do something, or whether it's therapy or anything, but like try and, like, I guess what has become increasingly important to me is like, maybe it's not in the work arena, but like having something in your life that is like that you're passionate about and you really enjoy and really fills you up, and you feel that like nurtured, nourished, excited, stimulated energy, yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Rich. I've really, really enjoyed listening to you this morning and seeing you. It's been a while.
A long time, yeah.
A lovely face. I'm sure I'll see more of you. I'm going to have you come back on. I think it's an essential part for you to come on. But if people want to contact you, want to work with you, or want to link in with you somehow, what would be the best way? I mean, if you do a Google search, just going to say, if you do a Google search, it comes straight up, so that you know.
So just I mean, there's probably just my email. I know it's a bit old school, right? But like richard@richardtowelltherapist.com.
And if anybody did, wants to just jump in, and I can also give them your email. But if you do Google Richard Towell, you come up straight away with your lovely face.
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah, top Richard Towell addiction therapist in the country. The best. Yeah.
So, Richard, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you giving us your time and your knowledge and your experience. There's been some definite lessons in there for me. And hopefully I will see you in person real soon.
Nice one. Thank you, Liz. I hope so too.
Yeah, so do I. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.